The gentle hum of the air conditioner was the only sound that permeated the stillness of the dimly lit office. Evelyn sat at her desk, her fingers hovering over the keyboard, frozen in a moment of hesitation. The clock on the wall ticked relentlessly, reminding her of the late hour and the fact that she was alone in the building. Alone, except for him. James Hartley, her boss and the owner of the prestigious architecture firm where she had worked for the past 5 years, was in his office just down the hall. The soft glow of his desk lamp spilled out from beneath the door, a beacon in the darkness that both beckoned and warned. At 28, Evelyn Ward was considered a rising star in the world of architectural design. Her talent and dedication had caught James' eye from the moment she joined the firm as a fresh-faced graduate. Now, half a decade later, their professional relationship had evolved into something far more complex and dangerous. James, at 45, was everything Evelyn had ever wanted in a man. Brilliant, charming, and devastatingly handsome. The silver streaks in his dark hair only added to his allure, giving him an air of distinguished maturity that made her weak at the knees. His piercing blue eyes seemed to see right through her, understanding her in ways that no one else ever had. But James was also married, a fact that weighed heavily on Evelyn's conscience every time she found herself alone with him. Every time their hands brushed as they pored over blueprints, every time he looked at her with that intensity that made her heart race. Evelyn took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. She had stayed late to finish the designs for their latest project, a luxurious eco-resort that could make or break their firm's reputation. But as the hours had ticked by, she found herself increasingly distracted by thoughts of James, just meters away in his office. With a shake of her head, Evelyn forced herself to focus on the task at hand. She began to type, losing herself in the intricacies of sustainable design and innovative architecture. Time seemed to slip away as she worked, the outside world fading into insignificance. A soft knock on her door startled her out of her concentration. She looked up to see James standing in the doorway, his tie loosened and his sleeves rolled up, revealing strong forearms. Evelyn's mouth went dry at the sight of him. "Still hard at work, I see," James said, his voice a low rumble that sent shivers down her spine. "You never cease to amaze me, Evelyn." She smiled, hoping the dim light would hide the flush creeping up her cheeks. "I wanted to finish the eco-resort designs. I think we're really onto something special here." James stepped into her office, closing the door behind him. The air seemed to crackle with tension as he approached her desk. "Show me what you've got," he said, leaning over her shoulder to look at her computer screen. Evelyn's heart pounded in her chest as she felt the warmth of his body so close to hers. She could smell his cologne, a heady mix of sandalwood and citrus that made her dizzy with desire. Pushing aside her turbulent emotions, she began to explain her latest ideas for the resort. As she spoke, James listened intently, occasionally asking questions or offering suggestions. Their minds worked in perfect synergy, bouncing ideas off each other and refining concepts until they had something truly extraordinary. "This is brilliant, Evelyn," James said at last, straightening up. "You have outdone yourself this time." She beamed at his praise, a warm glow of pride spreading through her chest. "Thank you, James. I couldn't have done it without your guidance." Their eyes met, and for a moment, the world seemed to stand still. The air between them was charged with unspoken desire, years of longing and stolen glances culminating in this single, breathless moment. James moved first, reaching out to tuck a stray strand of hair behind Evelyn's ear. His touch was electric, sending sparks racing across her skin. "Evelyn," he murmured, his voice husky with emotion. "You have no idea what you do to me." She leaned into his touch, her resolve crumbling. "James," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "we can't." But even as the words left her lips, she knew she didn't mean them. She wanted this, wanted him, more than she had ever wanted anything in her life. James cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently caressing her cheeks. "Tell me to stop," he said, his eyes searching hers. "Tell me you don't want this, and I'll walk away right now." Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. This was the moment of truth, the point of no return. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to do the right thing, to push him away and maintain the professional boundary between them. But as she looked into James' eyes, seeing the same longing and desire that burned within her reflected back at her, she knew she was lost. With a small shake of her head, she whispered, "I can't. I don't want you to stop." The words had barely left her mouth before James' lips were on hers, hot and demanding. Evelyn melted into the kiss, wrapping her arms around his neck and pulling him closer. Years of pent-up passion exploded between them as they kissed with a fervor that left them both breathless. James lifted Evelyn onto her desk, scattering papers and pens in their wake. She didn't care, couldn't bring herself to think about anything but the feel of his hands on her body, the taste of his lips, the intoxicating scent of his skin. They made love right there in her office, urgent and passionate, the risk of discovery only adding to the thrill. As they lay tangled together in the aftermath, reality slowly began to seep back in. Evelyn traced patterns on James' chest, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Elation at finally being with the man she had desired for so long warred with guilt over the fact that he was married, that they had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. "What are we doing, James?" she asked softly, voicing the question that had been haunting her for months. He sighed, pulling her closer. "I don't know, Evelyn. I just know that I can't fight this anymore. What I feel for you, it's unlike anything I've ever experienced." She looked up at him, searching his face for answers. "But your wife?" James closed his eyes, pain etching lines across his forehead. "Catherine and I, we've been growing apart for years. She doesn't understand me, not the way you do. But I can't just walk away from my marriage, from the life we've built together." Evelyn felt her heart constrict at his words. She had known, of course, that this was how it would be, but hearing him say it out loud made it all too real. "So where does that leave us?" she asked, hating how small and vulnerable her voice sounded. James opened his eyes, meeting her gaze with an intensity that took her breath away. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I do know that I can't give you up. Not now, not ever." And so began their clandestine affair, a passionate, all-consuming secret that threatened to destroy everything they had worked for. Over the next few months, Evelyn and James stole moments together whenever they could. Late nights at the office turned into heated encounters in dark corners. Business trips became opportunities for stolen weekends in far-off cities, where they could pretend, just for a little while, that the outside world didn't exist. Their work continued to flourish, their creative partnership reaching new heights as their personal relationship deepened. The eco-resort project was a resounding success, earning their firm accolades and bringing in a flood of new clients. But as their professional star rose, the weight of their secret grew heavier. Evelyn found herself constantly looking over her shoulder, terrified that someone would discover their affair. She hated herself for the lies she told, the excuses she made to friends and family about why she was working so late, why she never seemed to have time for a social life anymore. James, too, was struggling. The guilt of his infidelity ate away at him, manifesting in mood swings and bouts of melancholy that Evelyn couldn't quite penetrate. He would alternate between periods of intense passion and distant coldness, leaving her feeling off balance and uncertain. As winter gave way to spring, tensions in the office began to rise. Rumors started to circulate about Evelyn's rapid rise through the ranks, whispers of favoritism and impropriety that made her skin crawl. She tried to ignore them, to focus on her work and on the stolen moments with James, but the stress was taking its toll. It all came to a head on a rainy April evening. Evelyn was working late, as usual, when Sarah, one of the junior architects, knocked on her door. "Evelyn, do you have a minute?" Sarah asked, her expression guarded. Evelyn nodded, gesturing for her to come in. "Of course. What's on your mind?" Sarah hesitated, fidgeting with the hem of her blazer. I don't know how to say this, but people are talking, Evelyn, about you and Mr. Hartley." Evelyn felt the blood drain from her face. She fought to keep her expression neutral as she asked, "What do you mean?" "They're saying that the reason you've been getting all the best projects, all the promotions, is because you and Mr. Hartley are involved." Sarah looked deeply uncomfortable, but pressed on. I don't want to believe it, Evelyn. You're brilliant, and you deserve every success you've had. But the rumors are getting out of hand, and I thought you should know. Evelyn's mind raced, trying to formulate a response that wouldn't sound defensive or guilty. I appreciate you telling me this, Sarah, she said carefully. But I can assure you that there's nothing inappropriate going on between Mr. Hartley and myself. We have a strong professional relationship, nothing more. The lie tasted bitter on her tongue, but she forced herself to maintain eye contact with Sarah, willing her to believe it. Sarah nodded, looking relieved. I'm glad to hear that. I'll do my best to shut down the rumors when I hear them. After Sarah left, Evelyn sat at her desk, her head in her hands. The carefully constructed facade she and James had built was crumbling around them. She knew she needed to talk to him, to figure out how they were going to handle this. With a heavy heart, she made her way to James' office. She knocked softly, then entered without waiting for a response. James was standing by the window, staring out at the rain-soaked city below. He turned when she entered, and Evelyn was struck by how tired he looked, how the weight of their secret seemed to have aged him. We need to talk, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. James nodded, gesturing for her to sit. I know, I've been meaning to speak with you as well. Evelyn perched on the edge of one of the leather armchairs facing his desk, her body tense with apprehension. The rumors are getting worse, James. Sarah just came to warn me about them. It's only a matter of time before they reach Catherine. James sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair. I know. I've been hearing things too. Evelyn, He trailed off, seemingly at a loss for words. Evelyn felt a cold dread settle in the pit of her stomach. What is it, James? She prompted, dreading his answer. He met her gaze, his blue eyes filled with a sadness that broke her heart. Catherine's pregnant, he said quietly. The words hit Evelyn like a physical blow. She felt as though all the air had been sucked out of the room, leaving her gasping and disoriented. What? She managed to choke out. How? When? James moved to kneel in front of her, taking her hands in his. It wasn't planned, he said. We've been trying for years with no success. I thought it would never happen. But now. Evelyn pulled her hands away, standing abruptly. She needed space, needed to be able to think clearly without the intoxicating presence of James clouding her judgment. So what does this mean? She asked, hating how small and fragile her voice sounded. For us? James stood as well, reaching for her, but she took a step back. Evelyn, please, he pleaded. I love you. You have to know that. But this changes everything. I can't walk away from my child. Evelyn felt as though she was shattering into a million pieces. She had known, deep down, that this day would come, that eventually reality would intrude on their perfect secret world. But she hadn't been prepared for how much it would hurt. I understand, she said, surprised at how calm she sounded. You have to do what's right for your family. James took a step towards her, his eyes pleading. I don't want to lose you, Evelyn. Maybe we can find a way. But Evelyn was already shaking her head. No, James, we both know this has to end. It should have ended before it ever began. With those words, she turned and walked out of his office, out of the building into the pouring rain. She walked for hours, letting the cold water soak through her clothes, feeling as though it might wash away the pain and guilt that threatened to consume her. The next few weeks were a blur of pain and confusion for Evelyn. She threw herself into her work with a fervor that bordered on obsession, staying at the office until the early hours of the morning and arriving before anyone else. She avoided James as much as possible, communicating only through terse emails and brief professional exchanges when absolutely necessary. The rumors in the office slowly began to die down as people noticed the new distance between Evelyn and James. But the damage had been done. Evelyn could feel the speculative glances, could hear the whispers that followed her through the halls. It was Sarah who finally broke through her self-imposed isolation. The younger woman cornered Evelyn in the break room one afternoon, her expression a mix of concern and determination. Evelyn, we need to talk, Sarah said, her voice low but firm. Evelyn sighed, setting down her coffee mug. What is it, Sarah? Sarah glanced around to make sure they were alone, then leaned in closer. "I know, Evelyn," she said softly, "about you and Mr. Hartley." Evelyn felt her heart stop for a moment, then start racing. She opened her mouth to deny it, but Sarah held up a hand to stop her. "Please, don't lie to me," Sarah said. "I've seen the way you look at each other. I saw you leaving his office that night, the way you both changed after that. And now I see how much you're hurting." Evelyn slumped against the counter, the fight going out of her. "Does everyone know?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Sarah shook her head. "No, I don't think so. I'm just observant. And I care about you, Evelyn. You've been a mentor to me, and I hate seeing you like this." Tears pricked at Evelyn's eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. "It's over now," she said. "It has to be." Sarah reached out and squeezed her hand. "I'm so sorry, Evelyn. Is there anything I can do?" Evelyn managed a weak smile. "You're doing it, Sarah. Just being here. Thank you." From that day on, Sarah became Evelyn's confidant and support system. She covered for Evelyn when the older woman needed a moment to compose herself, ran interference when James tried to speak with her alone, and provided a sympathetic ear when Evelyn finally broke down and told her the whole story. As spring turned to summer, Evelyn slowly began to heal. The pain of losing James was still there, a constant ache in her chest, but it was no longer all-consuming. She started to remember who she was before him, the ambitious, talented architect who had dreams and goals of her own. It was on a warm July evening that Evelyn found herself working late once again, putting the finishing touches on a new project. The office was quiet, most of her colleagues having left hours ago to enjoy the beautiful weather. A soft knock on her door made her look up. James stood in the doorway, looking uncertain and vulnerable in a way she had never seen before. "Can we talk?" he asked softly. Evelyn hesitated for a moment, then nodded. James entered the office, closing the door behind him. "How are you, Evelyn?" he asked, his voice gentle. She managed a small smile. Doing better," Evelyn replied, surprised to find that it wasn't a lie. "How are you, James? How's Catherine?" A flicker of emotion passed across James' face, guilt, regret. Evelyn couldn't quite tell. "She's good. The pregnancy is progressing well." He paused, running a hand through his hair. "Evelyn, I miss you. Not just the physical aspect. I miss our talks, our collaboration. You understand me in a way no one else does." Evelyn felt her heart constrict. She had missed him too, more than she cared to admit. But she knew they couldn't go back. "James," she said softly, "we can't do this. You're going to be a father. You need to focus on your family." James nodded, his expression pained. "I know. I needed you to know that what we had was real. It wasn't just some fling for me." "It wasn't for me either," Evelyn admitted. "But that doesn't change anything. We made a mistake, James. A beautiful, heartbreaking mistake. But it's over now." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their shared history hanging between them. Finally, James spoke again. "I have a proposition for you, Evelyn. A professional one," he added quickly, seeing her wary expression. "What kind of proposition?" Evelyn asked. Curiosity piqued despite herself. James leaned forward, his eyes alight with the passion that had first drawn her to him. "The firm is expanding. We're opening a new office in San Francisco, and we need someone to head it up. Someone talented, driven, and intimately familiar with our philosophy and methods." Evelyn's eyes widened as she realized what he was saying. "You want me to run the San Francisco office?" James nodded. "You're the best person for the job, Evelyn. Your work on the eco-resort project proved that you're ready for this level of responsibility. And," he hesitated, then continued, "I think it might be good for both of us to have some distance." Evelyn's mind raced. San Francisco had always been one of her favorite cities, and the opportunity to lead a new office was beyond anything she had imagined for herself at this stage in her career. But she couldn't help but wonder if James was trying to get rid of her, to remove the temptation she represented. As if reading her thoughts, James added softly, "This isn't me pushing you away, Evelyn. If anything, it's me acknowledging how valuable you are to this firm. We can't lose you." Evelyn took a deep breath, trying to sort through the whirlwind of emotions and possibilities. "Can I have some time to think about it?" she asked. James nodded. "Of course. Take all the time you need. But, Evelyn..." He paused, meeting her eyes with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You deserve this. Don't let what happened between us hold you back from achieving everything you're capable of." With that, he stood and left her office, leaving Evelyn to contemplate the unexpected turn her life had taken. Over the next few weeks, Evelyn threw herself into researching the San Francisco architecture scene, analyzing market trends, and imagining the possibilities for the new office. The more she looked into it, the more excited she became about the opportunity. She confided in Sarah about the offer, valuing her friend's perspective. "It sounds amazing, Evelyn," Sarah said over coffee one morning. "But are you sure you're ready to leave everything behind? Your life is here." Evelyn sighed, stirring her latte absently. "That's just it, Sarah. I'm not sure I have much of a life here anymore, ever since. Well, I've been existing, not living. Maybe a fresh start is exactly what I need." Sarah reached across the table to squeeze her hand. "Whatever you decide, I support you. Just promise me you're doing this for yourself, not to run away from James." Evelyn smiled at her friend, grateful for her unwavering support. "I promise. This is about my career, my future. James is part of my past now." As July turned to August, Evelyn made her decision. She scheduled a meeting with James to give him her answer. Walking into his office, Evelyn felt a sense of déjà vu. How many times had she entered this room, her heart racing with anticipation? But this time was different. She felt calm, centered, sure of herself in a way she hadn't been in months. "I'll take the job," she said without preamble as she sat down across from James. A mix of emotions flickered across his face: pride, sadness, and something else Evelyn couldn't quite identify. "I'm glad," he said softly. "You'll do amazing things in San Francisco, Evelyn. I've always known you were destined for greatness." Evelyn felt a lump form in her throat. Despite everything, a part of her would always love this man. "Thank you, James, for everything, the good and the bad. It's all led me here." James stood and walked around the desk, stopping in front of her. For a moment, Evelyn thought he might try to embrace her, and she tensed. But he simply held out his hand. "To new beginnings," he said. Evelyn stood and took his hand, shaking it firmly. "To new beginnings," she echoed. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of preparations. Evelyn threw herself into planning for the new office, interviewing potential team members, and tying up loose ends on her current projects. She found an apartment in San Francisco's vibrant Mission District and began the process of packing up her life in New York. On her last day at the New York office, her colleagues threw her a goodbye party. There was cake and champagne, speeches and well wishes. Evelyn was touched by the outpouring of support and affection from her coworkers. As the party wound down, she found herself alone with James for a moment. They stood by the window, looking out at the New York skyline they both loved so much. "I'm proud of you, Evelyn," James said softly. "You're going to do great things in San Francisco." Evelyn turned to look at him, really look at him, for the first time in months. She saw the lines around his eyes, the silver in his hair, and realized with a start that he looked older, more tired than she remembered. The weight of their affair, of his impending fatherhood, had taken its toll on him too. "Thank you, James," she said, "for everything. I hope you find happiness, you and Catherine and the baby." James smiled, a sad, wistful expression. "I hope you find happiness too, Evelyn. You deserve it more than anyone I know." As Evelyn boarded her flight to San Francisco the next morning, she felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. She was leaving behind the only life she'd known as an adult, the city she loved, the man who had both elevated and nearly destroyed her. But as the plane took off, soaring above the familiar New York skyline, Evelyn felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She was free from the secrets, the guilt, the constant fear of discovery, free to become the woman and the architect she had always dreamed of being. San Francisco welcomed her with fog-shrouded hills and the promise of new beginnings. As Evelyn stepped out of the airport and into her new life, she felt a sense of possibility she hadn't experienced in years. The first few months in San Francisco were challenging but exhilarating. Evelyn threw herself into establishing the new office, building a team, and making connections in the local architecture community. She worked long hours, but for the first time in a long time, she felt truly alive. As autumn turned to winter, Evelyn received an email from Sarah. Attached was a photo of a newborn baby, James' son. The email was brief, simply saying, "Thought you should know. Hope you're doing well in SF. Miss you." Evelyn stared at the photo for a long time, a mix of emotions swirling through her. There was a pang of what might have been, but it was overshadowed by a sense of relief. She had made the right choice in leaving. James had his family, and she had her career, her independence, her future. She closed the email without replying and turned back to her work. On her desk was a sketch of her latest project, an innovative, sustainable apartment complex that could revolutionize urban living. As she picked up her pencil and began to refine the design, Evelyn smiled to herself. This was where she belonged. This was her passion, her purpose. The pain of her affair with James had shaped her, had forced her to confront hard truths about herself and what she wanted from life. But it didn't define her. She was more than that story, more than that mistake. As the San Francisco fog rolled in outside her office window, Evelyn felt a sense of peace settle over her. She had survived the storm of passion and betrayal, had emerged stronger and wiser. And now, finally, she was ready to write the next chapter of her story, on her own terms.